G'day everyone. Today I'm going to be walking you through how to disassemble your heads-up display for your BMW E60. Now this is something that I had to do recently, as one of the components inside of it here, the shutter number 15, as you can see, which is in here, is a little piece of plastic. And the way it works is when the car is cold or when the car is switched off, that shutter closes, and that is supposed to protect the projection elements inside from sunlight, as well as when it's cold it helps the projection elements to heat up faster. But what happened to me recently is that there's a servo that drives that shutter, which you'll see a little bit later. So it's basically just like a flap, and the servo stopped opening and closing, and it got stuck in the closed position. So my heads-up display was not projecting onto my windscreen, but when I looked through the heads-up, when I looked from above the car, above the windscreen, I could see light coming from behind the heads-up display. So if this is a problem that you're having, if you can see light coming from the HUD and the HUD is responding and there's no error codes in INPA or whatever you're reading the errors with, and if you use INPA you can actually set the brightness of the HUD to maximum, and when you set it to maximum it will be really obvious that there is light coming from behind that shutter and the shutter's just not opening. So if those are the issues you're having, what I've done could possibly help you. Otherwise, this is just a slideshow of how I disassembled my HUD and the things I learned along the way. So first of all, we've got some pictures that I've taken of the HUD. I'll spend a few seconds on each of those, and if you want to look at them you can pause the video, but I am also going to upload all of these photos into a Google Drive, which I will link in the description of this video, so if you want to go through them one by one, you can do that as well. First thing to note, just before we do start going through it, is that according to BMW and VDO, who manufacture these units are not supposed to be disassembled and they're not supposed to be repaired, they're supposed to just be replaced. And replacement units new are about $3,000 Australian at the time that I'm recording this, or about from $500 to $1,500 second hand, and that's my motivation for wanting to repair it. So this is up the top here, this is the top of your HUD, so this is the part that points out into the windscreen. This is one of the sides. These black mirrors that you see, you'll see throughout the slideshow, they're a little more durable than the mirrors that are inside the unit, because I think this is just the coating that gets applied when the mirrors are made, so don't worry too much about scratching these, but obviously try not to. Okay, so the first thing to note is when I was looking at that BMW parts breakdown that you saw on the first page, it said that this cover here, and this just keeps dust and stuff out, this is the top, what points into the windscreen. It said that the cover was made of glass. It's actually made of plastic, so if yours is scratched up or whatever, you could probably just cut this out and glue in a new piece of plastic, but I didn't want to mess around with that. Another thing to note, as we'll see later, is I don't recommend you take this piece of plastic off unless you absolutely have to get at something inside, because the mirrors inside are very fragile, and I'm pretty sure these are assembled in like a clean room or something, so there's no dust inside, so as soon as you open it there's going to be dust in there. Okay, so once again, this black plastic area down here, this is what points out of the windscreen, that's the top. So it only has one screw that retains it. It has this one screw, and then it has a number of clips around the side that you'll see if you take yours out. You've got this hose that comes off the HUD and goes further into the dashboard. It goes all the way and it sits above about where the hazard button is on the climate control system. I suspect this is the temperature probe that the servo uses to determine whether or not to open or close when the display is trying to warm up. We've got this tape, this heatsink here. The heatsink is held on by this aluminium foil tape. There's a piece here. There's also another piece up here. The tape is pretty fragile. It's like aluminium foil. It's easy to tear, so just be careful when you're taking it off. This black plastic thing over here, this is what you plug into your car. And then the other thing is, if you note these little fins along where the heatsink is, if you remove the aluminium foil tape, these fins are the only thing that hold the I shouldn't say heatsink. I think it's a noise shield. They're the only things that hold the shield on, and they just pop off. As well as that, what have we got? Okay, so this would be the bottom of the unit. You can see the screen in the background there, so this is what we were just talking about. There is a mirror housed inside here that you'll see later. This is the main power connector again. This is the temperature probe. I actually thought it was the fiber optic cable because I had heard that there was fiber optics going to the HUD, but this literally does not connect to anything inside the car. It just runs inside the car and gets clipped in somewhere. It doesn't connect to anything. This black plastic assembly is what guides your temperature probe, so it sort of weaves its way through a little bit to keep it in place. You've got your mounting tabs at the back here. That's what mounts it to the car, and possibly what adjusts the height. I'll get into that later. This is just one of the part numbers. I took photos of all the stickers and stuff on here in case anybody has been looking for them and couldn't find them. So this is for my model, which is an Australian right-hand drive, late 2008 production model. It has a CIC navigation system, not the CCC, so that might be different if you're watching this. This first photo shows me just removing this screw for the top cover. Not really too much there. Okay, so as I said before, in hindsight, I wouldn't recommend removing this plastic cover, and you can see this red mirror at the back here. As I said here, it's not in this photo, but it happens after I took the photo. When I pulled this cover off, there were little flakes of dust and stuff that had gotten in, and I tried to wipe them off with a clean tissue. I probably should have used a lint-free cloth or something, but it was a clean tissue straight out of the box. I tried to wipe these bits of dust, and these bits of dust, I should add, bits of this foam insulation here. So I tried to wipe them off, and as I wiped them off, there was a huge scratch or something. It started rubbing the coating of this red mirror off. So I would recommend keeping the top cover on at all times unless absolutely necessary. The only other thing here is this I believe is where the top cover bolt was, and there are some additional clips here and here that I broke, so try not to break them when you take them off. Okay, so this is the heat probe guide as we discussed earlier, and this is the actual heatsink with the fins here. So to the start of the removal process is you take out, there was a bolt here that I've already removed. There's a screw here that I've removed. Remove this screw, remove this screw. So you remove that black plastic heat probe guide that gets removed out of there. Got some more part numbers there or something, I don't know, BMW stuff. Alright, now we remove some more screws from the heatsink. I believe this one also comes out. Okay, and now looking at the underside of the heatsink, we have this aluminium foil tape here that is holding this shield onto the heatsink. You also have these screws that don't need to be removed just yet. There is another screw at the back of the power connector. As I said before, this aluminium tape is fragile, so be careful when you're removing that. And after you remove this tape, these little fin things here are what hold the heat shield, or the shield, whatever it is, on top of the PCB. So after you remove the tape, you just pull straight up and these little fin teeth things will disengage and it'll pop off. So that is with this shield removed. We have what I believe is the main PCB. So we've got over here, this is our main power connector. We've got some sort of isolation here, even though it's not high voltage, because it's just coming from the card system. A bunch of other stuff here that I'm not really qualified to comment on. Regardless, we've got where these arrows are pointing to, these screws, they all get removed. I actually don't think there's a screw there. There might be. Remove it if there is. If not, don't. So to remove the PCB from what's behind it, you got to remove these screws. I've got some pictures here of the chips in case anybody is interested and they want to look them up. Okay, so on this slide, I talk about this ribbon connector here that you would have seen on the previous slides. This goes through the board underneath and connects to one of the other PCBs, I think the PCB for the servo or something. So I had a bit of trouble figuring this out, but these black plastic tabs, to remove the ribbon, you get a small spudger or something. I would use a plastic tool, because if you use a metal tool, you're liable to try to push and miss and end up damaging something on the circuit board. So you push these in the direction of the blue arrow, and that will disengage the lock that holds the ribbon cable in. This ribbon cable needs to be removed in order to remove the PCB. When you're removing the ribbon cable, as when you're touching any ribbon cable ever, you should evenly apply force across the whole width of the cable. So don't just pull on one part, pull across the whole thing, and that will reduce the chance of you breaking it. Because if you break it, you're screwed. Okay, so I sort of missed this before, but up here next to my hand is the main connector to the car, as we discussed before, and underneath it you can see these pins here. So there's actually a board-to-board connector that connects this circuit board where the sticker is. This is the one we've been looking at, to the circuit board underneath. There's no locking mechanism, as I say here. You just pull the board straight up and it disengages. I don't think you could screw it up if you tried. Okay, so after you've disconnected your first ribbon cable, you can pull and unscrewed everything. You can pull your PCB assembly away. There's another ribbon cable on the underside of your PCB assembly, so don't pull it too hard. This electrical tape, or whatever they've used, can be removed to give you a bit more slack with a ribbon cable. This photo is just showing that I've got this ribbon cable at the back here removed. Sorry, at the front removed, that we were discussing earlier. So this ribbon cable on the underside, the one I was talking about previously, it also has these locking tabs here. I think these ones pull, instead of pulling parallel to the board, I think they pull perpendicular to the board to unlock the cable, the ribbon cable. But you'll want to double check that. Okay, so as you can see here, it's the locking mechanism again. You've got these two tabs on the side. So after you pull that cable out, you can completely remove that first PCB that we've been talking about the whole time, and you can set that aside. So we've got a few things going on here now. We have this white thing. This is the servo for the shutter that you'll find we'll talk about later. So this is what opens and closes that shutter to do shutter things. We've got this blurry boxy thing up here. This is actually the LED matrix. This is what provides the backlighting for the projection. So if you were really crafty and you wanted to change the color of your HUD, you might be able to change the LEDs in here. We've got I think that's about it. This ribbon cable here goes to the servo that you'll see later. So after disconnecting those other ribbon cables, so this is the second ribbon cable I've been talking about. So if we go back a slide, this one here that I've got circled 3 times, that's this one here. So this whole assembly, you can see behind it, this is the heatsink behind it. There's like a right angle thing going on here. This simply pulls away the LED matrix, which you can see here with the whatever optical stuff's going on in there. Also just pulls away. You do not need to unscrew any of these. You do not need to disconnect that. And I suspect the LED matrix is fairly robust, so I wouldn't worry too much about getting small bits of dust or whatever in it. Here's another better picture of the LED matrix. It's kind of hard to take a photo of. There's some kaleidoscope thing going on inside there. Definitely worth having a look at if you're going to pull your HUD out. This is just another part number. More part numbers. Okay, so we're jumping ahead here a little bit, but that LED matrix that I was just discussing, that goes into this square hole here. So when you pull that LED matrix off, it reveals this square hole here. Inside this hole is the TFT display. So this is a display very similar to what you would see on like a calculator, a cheap calculator. It's a very, very cheap and simple, well, these days, maybe not when the car was manufactured, cheap and simple LCD display as far as I'm aware. And the way that the HUD works is it's a bit like the allegory of the cave, if you will. This thing here shows an image and it's sort of see-through a little bit. So you'll have like, I don't know, whatever you want being displayed on here. It's not very bright, and then that LED matrix we were just discussing shines light onto the image, and where the light hits the image, you get contrast appearing, and that contrast then goes through the TFT display and reflects off the mirrors and gets enlarged, and then it is displayed on your windscreen. So it's pretty cool. These days you could make a rudimentary one of these with a OLED display, which is self-lighting, but I suspect the OLEDs would be way too dim to project onto a windscreen, so I digress. Now, to remove the TFT display, you've got 2 screws here, and this is to remove this assembly from the main assembly. You remove those 2 screws. It pulls free, it also pulls with it the temperature probe, or whatever this is. This ribbon cable was disconnected previously, so that should already be off. Just go back to that slide. This black stuff, this black plastic at the back, you can see here, this is now the internal side of that TFT display. So anything you see on your HUD in this black plastic is on the inside of the HUD, so it doesn't reflect and stuff. So this pulls, you've now pulled this out of your HUD. You can set it aside. So we've got a bit of stuff going on here, starting from top to bottom. So this hole here is what you just pulled your TFT display out of, and you have now exposed the inside of the HUD unit. At the back here, where you can see this light, this is a mirror. This mirror is housed in that black plastic casing that I talked about much earlier. It's like a big blocky black plastic casing on the back of the unit. You can see on this mirror the scratch that I was talking about in regards to the top cover earlier. I was saying don't remove the top cover because you will scratch it, and this is the scratch that I made just from wiping it with a tissue. I'm pretty sure it's a scratch, I don't think it's a smudge. I wasn't game to try and remove it. That being said, it's not the end of the world, because when you've got the light reflecting on it, it all sort of covers it up anyway. Okay, so moving down, we've got the shutter. You can't really see it because it's a crap photo, but the shutter here is folded down. I manually folded it down with my finger before taking the photo, and it is attached where you can see this white, that is the hinge coming from the servo. So the hinge goes through there, goes in here, and then you've got the shutter that probably looks a little something like this. So this shutter, when the shutter's closed, it blocks this hole and it stops the light coming through to the mirror assembly. As you can see down here, this white thing, as I said earlier, this is the shutter servo. This is looking inside the same hole. These 3 tabs here, these are the mounting points for this servo. Okay, so I'm just going to go back here. The shutter's inside here. I would love to tell you how to remove it, but when I pulled the servo off, something snapped and the shutter just sort of disappeared inside the hole, and that was that. I didn't really care because I'm removing the shutter. So as you can see, you can pull this servo assembly out gently after pushing out those little tabs. You can see the hinge here where the shutter previously was attached. It is now inside the HUD at the time of this photo being taken. Okay, so you can see in here on top of that mirror I was talking about earlier, the shutter just fell in there. It's sort of lying there, and as well, I think, as one of those black plastic tabs, because I wasn't very careful removing it. This mirror doesn't have that coating that the other one had, so I think it's a little bit more scratch resistant. Anyway, I just tipped the HUD back up and the shutter fell out. It's all good. Okay, so that more or less concludes the teardown as far as I went. Things that I didn't cover really are the mirrors inside the HUD, as well as possibly one of the circuit boards as well. But if you're looking to replace your shutter inside the HUD, it's pretty easy. I would just say be wary of dust getting in. Try to do it somewhere that's clean. Keep that top cover on. If there is dust inside it, you could maybe blow it out with compressed air, but I wouldn't recommend trying to wipe it. And the next lot of photos are just the reassembly and other things that I wanted to point out. So there's some markings on the servo. I don't think you could use that to identify it, but they're there. Here's some stickers on the backs of mirrors. So all of these shiny things, as I mentioned earlier, these are all mirrors. They're the back sides of the mirror, so they don't really matter too much. There's the servo again. You can see there is some stampings inside the mirror back here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about reconnecting these ribbon cables. It's really not too hard. You just have to be a little bit careful with them. Okay, so when you're inserting the ribbon cables, as you can read for yourself, but these, listen to me first and then read. These copper fingers from the ribbon, they are what connect into this connector here. So these copper fingers, or whatever they're made of, at the end of them, so just after, you can see that they widen out a little, just after they widen out, they change to like a tin coated contactor or something. So what you need to do is, first of all, you need to see which side of the ribbon cable the tin coated contactors are on. Second of all, you need to see which side of the connector itself the connector contactors are on, and then you just insert it until you can no longer see the silvery connectors, and then you push your locking mechanism, you just push it back the opposite way that you took it out. This one here is similar, so you just push it in. I found it was easiest to do this by feeding a little bit of slack through the hole. So feed more ribbon through than you think you'll need, and then use the ribbon. You can bend it a little bit to push into the contactor, then lock it and pull the slack back out. That's just another sticker I thought would be worth taking a photo of. Alright, and that's basically it. You reassemble everything, opposite order that you took it out, and throw it back in your car. And for me, it's kind of a crappy picture here, but the HUD has come back on, because as far as I'm aware, that shutter flap is not essential, and in my mind I don't even really think it serves any useful purpose. I live in a pretty nice climate, doesn't get too cold, gets pretty hot, but I don't really see the shutter being necessary. So after removing it, the only thing I will do is I'll be covering up the HUD with like a dash, like a sun protector or a bit of cardboard or something when I leave the car, just so that the sun doesn't shine into the LED array and the TFT display too much. But other than that, if you've got an E60 and it's got a HUD and the HUD's not coming on, even when you push the button, and even when you tell it to an imper, and you can look inside and see the shutter and the shutter's not opening, this may be a solution. The other bit that you don't see here is that you have to remove more or less the entire dashboard in order to get the HUD out, which for me took like 12 hours to take it out and put it back in. So good luck. Check the link in the description for the photos, and yeah, good luck.